This lesson is going to be about comparing decimals. Let's review first what we've learned about decimals so far. We know that decimals and fractions are basically the same thing. They're showing a part of a whole. The only difference is decimals is used in our base 10 place values system. So let's take a look as a review at this first grid over here, and this has been divided into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pieces. So if I were to shade in one, two, and 3 of those parts, we would say that the fractional for this amount that is shown is 3/10. And that makes sense because I have 10 parts, that's my denominator, and 3 of those that I'm interested in are talking about, that's my numerator, 3/10. And we know that this is less than half of my whole because it would take 5. We can also now write this as a decimal, and we would write it decimal 3, or we could write it, you can see it either way, 0 decimal 3. Okay. Now, just like we have discovered, is that the reason we call this 3/10 as the same as our fraction here at 3/10 is you see that we know the number of parts, which is 3, our numerator. However, our denominator is now part of our place value system. So the first place value to the right of the decimal point, we would call this tenths. And make sure that you know that we're adding that TH on the end, tenths. That is our first place. As you can see in here, still, there's my decimal point, so the first place to the right, we're still tenths. Therefore, this would be the ones place here where the 0 is. So 0 ones is 0, so that's why we can write it either way. So let's take a look at the grid over here. We can see that this grid has a lot more parts than this. And if we look at it carefully, we know that we've basically taken these 10 parts and broken these 10 parts into 10 parts each, if you look at that. So if we looked at the same amount here, so that's 10 hundredths. And let me back up just a second here. So we know that that amount of this whole shape, since it's 100 parts, we would call this 1/100th. We could also write this as a decimal. We would write that decimal 0, 1. And as you can see, that first place is tenths, and we haven't made any tenths, as you can see, because a tenth would be that amount right there. So we haven't made an entire tenth yet. We only have 1 out of 100 parts, 1/100th. But you see that the 1, now we have the next place value over from the decimal point, which is the hundredths. So we have the hundredths place. So this counts this size parts, so hundredths. This counts tenths. So we have tenths and hundredths. And of course, they're in the same family because 100 is a multiple of 10. It is 10 times more pieces than the tenths. All right, so let's go on now that we've kind of reviewed about tenths and hundredths, and let's start comparing them. So let's take a look, and if I asked you to compare 4 tenths with 8 tenths, you can pause it now and see if you can figure this out on your own. I hope this was an easy one for you. If you think about the model here, and we want to show these amounts visually. So if I did 4 tenths, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4 tenths. Of course, this over here, we have 8 tenths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Of course, these two are easy. We know that 8 tenths is certainly greater than 4 tenths, or we could say 4 tenths is less than 8 tenths. Remember, the big mouth goes toward the larger value. Let's go on to something that's a little harder, though, and one of the things that students make a mistake on. So let's start comparing two amounts here, and let's say I had 18 hundredths, and I'm trying to compare that with 2 tenths. So let's model 18 hundredths before we start making a decision. So 18 hundredths, if I model 18 hundredths, I would count that's 1 hundredth, 2 hundredths, 3 hundredths, 4 hundredths, 5 hundredths, 6 hundredths, 7 hundredths, 8 hundredths, 9 hundredths, 10 hundredths, and of course we can see that makes 1 tenth. So that's why we have 1 in the tenths place, because those 10 hundredths made that 1 tenth. Okay, so we have 10 hundredths, 11 hundredths, 12 hundredths, 13 hundredths, 14 hundredths, 15 hundredths, 16 hundredths, 17 hundredths, 18 hundredths. So we can say this is the amount for 18 hundredths. Where we're looking over here and we're comparing it to 2 tenths. The common mistake that students make is that they see that 18 and 2 without thinking about the quantities that they are. And they will say, well, 18 looks bigger than 2, so 18. But we have to remember this is not 18 wholes, this is 18 hundredths. Okay, and we've just modeled it here. So what would 2 tenths look like? What would 2 tenths look like? Well, I've already got 1 tenth drawn, so let me draw in 1 more tenth. So as we can already see, that 2 tenths is larger than 18 hundredths. And we can see it's larger by 2 hundredths. We can see these two missing here. Again, we must think about the value of these numbers rather than just the digits. So if we were to take this over here, and I've drawn some lines and you'll see the purpose in a minute, is that if I move these 2 tenths, and then if you see these bars are bars that made 100 parts now from the 10 parts. So you can see that that 2/10 actually is the same thing as 20 hundredths. Okay? And now this makes it a little easier to see because we know that 20 hundredths is 2 more hundredths than 18 hundredths, and we can see it on the grid. All right, let's take a look at one more. And you try this one for your practice. Okay. Compare the following two fractions. Compare 36 hundredths to 4/10. If you can, try to count them out, pause it so you can still see the grids, and then see if you can figure it out. Well, if you said that 36 hundredths was less than 4/10, or 4/10 is greater than 36 hundredths, then you are correct. Let's take a look at these two. If I were showing 36 hundredths, we know now that this is 10 hundredths, or a tenth. So that's 10 hundredths, 20 hundredths, 30 hundredths, or 3/10. Each one of these, remember, is a tenth. Every time I make 10 hundredths, I make a tenth. And then we would have 6 more hundredths. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So here is my amount, 36 hundredths, which is less than a half. Let's take a look at 4/10. Okay, so here is 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10. And as you can see, 4/10, even though 36, the digits 3, 6 seem to be larger. Remember, that's a common mistake. We have to think about the amounts. 36 hundredths is made up of 3/10 and 6 more hundredths. However, this is made up of 4/10, and we know tenths are bigger than hundredths. This has 4/10. Or we could say this is 40 hundredths, because every time we make a tenth, it would equal 10 hundredths. So 40 hundredths is more than 36 hundredths. All right, you've had some practice and some modeling. So what I'd like for you to do now is go and log on to Edmodo and answer the two comparing questions and submit your answers in the comment area.